Welcome to Rico 12. I'm Justin B., your host and a child of an all-powerful and perfectly loving God and an addict living in the miracle of recovery one day at a time. Rico 12 is all about exploring the common threads of addiction and sharing tools and hope from those on a similar path. We gather from diverse backgrounds, faiths, and places to learn and support one another. Our speakers are members of various fellowships, addictions, and afflictions, thus showing the common threads of recovery no matter our affliction. Today is meeting number 310 of the Rico 12 speaker meeting. Super excited about that and super excited about our speaker today. Her name is Kahi W. She is a first-time speaker here on this meeting, and her topic today is called All of Me, Good and Bad. And I look forward to hearing that message here in just a few minutes. But first, for a little bit of business. Rico 12 has several recovery resources in our family of podcasts and social media communities. To learn more, listen more, connect more, or just hang out and learn and grow with us, you can check out the other podcasts at rico12.com. That's RECO12.com. And to join in our social communities, check out the chat and the show notes. I'll post those here in the chat and in the show notes of the podcast. Rico 12 is self-supporting, and your contributions help us continue our mission. Thanks to all of our spearheads, past, present, and future. And a special thanks this week goes out to Abigail, Lisa, and Barbara. Thank you for your generous donations. If you out there also feel the desire to become a spearhead and support this cause, please visit rico12.com/support or click on the links that I'll put in the chat and the show notes for one-time or monthly donation options. Your support, not just financially, but with your word of mouth, makes a difference in keeping us able to share these messages of recovery. We look forward each meeting to receiving from the light reflected from our speakers. That light inspires hope, meaning, worth, and growth in us, the listening audience. Now I'm going to introduce our guest speaker for today, Kahi W, and give just a little background information on her. Kahi W is a wife of 22 years, mother of 5, and has worked the 12 steps for betrayal trauma for the last 12 years. Born and raised in Hawaii, Kahi is grateful for the recovery tools she found when her family moved to Utah. She currently works Step 12 by assisting with women's betrayal trauma meetings for SA Lifeline. Take it away, Kahi. The floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. I'm super humbled to be here. When Justin asked if I would share, I said yes automatically. I know Justin through 12-step meetings, and I didn't realize it was on Zoom. I didn't realize that I would just be talking by myself. So I ask for your patience and prayers as I share my story and the things that I've learned as I have worked the 12 steps. I have listened to some of the past podcast meetings and have just been blown away by the experiences of others and the hope and strength that people find here, that people are willing to share here. So I hope that I can add something to that. As Justin said, I am working the 12 steps for betrayal trauma. My husband is a sex addict, and so I do the 12 steps through S&On. And I think what I wanted to share was just a little bit of my story and then talk about the idea of all of me, the good and the bad, that how I've come to recognize the good and the bad, how I've come to accept the good and the bad, and how I use the 12 steps to connect with my higher power. So in 2011, my husband and I had been married for 10 years, almost 10 years at that point, and he came to me and disclosed that he had a pornography addiction. I was completely caught off guard at that point, had no idea. And that night, he went to bed feeling very relieved that he had let this secret out. He felt like, hey, I'm ready, I'm good, I've let it out, I've done my part. And I was a complete mess. I felt like it was Jekyll and Hyde. Like I took on Mr. Jekyll and he took on Mr. Hyde, and I was a mess. So I stayed up that whole night crying, searching the internet for any kind of resources, help that I could find. And I was led to a website where they suggested that you tell one person, you just find one safe person that you could talk to. And I knew immediately that that person was my neighbor, who I kind of knew, but not really. She had been like a grandma figure with my kids over the past few months that we had lived at that house. And so in the morning, she happened to come over and to bring something, I think. And I just blurted out, my husband's addicted to pornography and I don't know what to do. And she just, shocked. I think it was in my bathroom. I was a complete mess. And she got me in touch with a friend, a cousin who had been working for SA Lifeline Foundation at the time. And through that friend, I was introduced to multiple people who had been looking and working recovery for sexual addiction and for betrayal trauma. I have come to recognize that was certainly God's hand in my life, that I probably at this point would have asked my neighbor for a cup of sugar or some eggs if I was missing them for a recipe, but I probably would not have asked her for a ride to the grocery store. But my higher power led me to ask her for help in this situation. And it was such a gift and a blessing. People often ask, why did you move to Utah from Hawaii? And years ago, I would have said, because it's too expensive in Hawaii and we couldn't afford it. Now, depending on my circle, I will often say I came to Utah to find recovery. I genuinely believe that I might not be here had I not found the recovery tools that I found. And I don't know that in the place I was in Hawaii, that those recovery tools they're not there yet. And I'm super grateful that I was led here. I heard in one of the podcasts that I listened to earlier this week, a woman say, I'm so grateful to be here. I'm grateful for the trials that I've had that have led me down this road. And I remember hearing that early on in recovery from other people who had been working for a while. And I just would roll my eyes like, you're full of crap. There's no way. There's no way that you actually can say that you're grateful. 12 years later, I can honestly say that I am a far better person now than I was before this trial came into my life. And I know that that's because of my higher power. I know that that's because as I humbly work the 12 steps or try my best, that I am being guided to who I really am, letting go of the bad, finding the good, holding on to that. And I'm really grateful. So I add myself to that club of I'm grateful for the trials that have led me here, even though they're really hard. When I initially came into the 12-step program, I felt very abandoned by God. I thought, I prayed about marrying this man and you said it was good. It was okay for me to do it. And now this is what you've done. And I grew up religious. In a very religious household. I still have a very religious household. We go to church every week. We pray. We read from our scriptures. And I felt like I had a solid relationship with God. And this knowledge of what my husband had been doing and where he had been was traumatizing, to say the least. Knocked me off my feet. And I felt like I can't trust any man in my life, is where I was at that point. And certainly not God, because I can't trust him. So steps 1, 2, and 3 were vital for me. I stayed there for a really long time. Steps 1, 2, and 3. And I can't. My life is unmanageable. He can, and I will let him. Is the short version that I say to myself frequently when I am struggling to trust, when I'm feeling like I need to control everyone around me, when I am in a trauma, in the middle of a trauma response. I can't, he can, and I will let him has been such a lifesaver to me. And so as I felt like I was finally able to get there, getting into step 4 was super hard. My first meeting that I went to, they were actually on step 4. And I just felt like, what are they talking about? I'm here to fix my husband. I'm not here. I don't have any issues. It's his fault. So why are we talking about our defects? And, but I'm grateful I stayed, because of course I have defects. Of course I do. And of course everybody does. But as I've been willing to look at those and really work through my steps around those defects, make amends, ask my higher power, who I now trust, to take those from me, and trust that as I let those go, I can be filled with other things that will help me get through it. Because for so long, those defects that I had really were survival mechanisms for me. And I believe that's true for anyone on the addiction side or not. We hang on to these things because they're survival mechanisms. They help us make it through when we don't have the tools that to do it any other way. And so as I have worked to gain new tools and worked to identify those defects and my assets, and then give them to God, I have just been so grateful for the peace and the serenity that comes, that I didn't know I didn't have before. I had no idea. If you would have asked me before all of this, I would have said, oh yeah, I know who God is. We're good. But I learned quickly that what I had done my whole life was, okay, here's God. And I would tell him all the time, no, I got this. You can go help somebody who really needs you. I'm good. I can take care of all of this by myself. I don't need anybody. I got this. And pornography addiction, sex addiction was truly the thing that knocked me off my feet until I said, okay, I don't got this. I don't know what to do. And for me, I hear often we talk about rock bottom, hitting rock bottom. That for me was rock bottom because I thought that I had everything under control. I thought that my life was going just the way that I had planned, and it didn't. And so now what? Now what do I do? So this concept of all of me, the good and the bad, has been something that I've really been working on, especially the last 3 or 4 years. My husband found recovery from sex addiction, worked recovery for a while, and then dropped off the bandwagon and reemerged about 10 years later with an addiction to money. And I found myself back in the hole again. And since then, I have recognized this need to really dive in and work boundaries in a different way. Just everything about the 12 steps, the program, in a deeper way. So again, grateful for the reminder that I'm not in control. I can't, he can, and I will let him, constantly reminding myself about that. I have, as I've been working and thinking a lot about step 7, I am particularly grateful for this prayer from the Alcoholics Anonymous book. It says, "My Creator, I'm now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defect of character which stands in the way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength as I go out from here to do your bidding. Amen." In the S-Anon book, it talks about humility as an ability to see yourself, like the good and the bad. And I remember when I started doing step 4 the first time, and even now, I still struggle. I'm getting better, but I could list my defects like 100, like on and on and on. I would just list them over and over again, but I could not. I had a really hard time coming up with any kind of assets. And I have been grateful for the recognition that my Creator gave me both assets and defects, and that as I look for them, I can really be a tool for good for him. But as I hide from either one of those, I'm not as useful because for some reason I'm making it about myself, or I'm whatever it might be that's holding me back. I'm not as useful if I'm not willing to admit my defects and also draw on my assets. I can remember sitting in a church meeting once and the teacher saying, does anybody here have any defects? And what do you do about them? Like, do you have any mantras that you say? And I shot my hand up and I said, oh, I have a defect. And I said, my defect is that I feel like I need to control everything. Like, in order to feel peaceful and serene, I have to be in control of everything. And so the way that I deal with that is by continuously telling myself, let go and let God. And this poor teacher did not actually expect anybody to raise their hand and talk about their defects. And he immediately started backpedaling, like, well, no, that's not really a defect. I mean, that's like, and he's talking. And I wasn't expecting that either, because he asked the question. And my husband, who was sitting next to me, raised his hand and he said, just so you know, she's not self-conscious about this defect. Like, she's fine. You don't need to try to make it better. You don't need to try to make it go away. But I did have a couple of people afterwards thank me for bringing it up, because it's obviously something that, I mean, I think all humans struggle with this. But when we're not willing to talk about it, then how do we get help? And I would say that this has been especially true for me in this arena of betrayal trauma. Talking about sexual addiction, talking about being married to someone who has a sexual addiction is very uncomfortable for people. They'll often ask me, what do you do for work, or what do you do in your free time? And I will tell them, I help set up 12-step meetings for women that are suffering betrayal trauma. And they're like, what is that? And I said, well, it's typically someone who is, like married to a sex addict or something like that. And they immediately, like, if I want to cut off a conversation with somebody, if I don't want to talk to them, I just pull that out and they're like, they're out, they're gone. they don't have anything else to say to me. And that's okay. But I just really have found that so many people have this in their lives. And if we were just willing to talk about it more, I really believe that the world would be a better place. If we can each show up in our vulnerability with the good and the bad, not in a self-deprecating way or not in a braggy way, but just like, this is life. This is us. This is human beings. We'll all be better off. One of the things that I've been really grateful for as I've worked the 12 steps is by seeing the good and the bad that I have in myself and allowing myself to work through all the feelings that come up around that. I have seen that I'm better able to accept other people's good and bad, to see it and to love and connect and feel empathy for all of that. To see people as the complex humans that we are is such a gift, because if we're all just, one level, if we're flat and we're just one thing, we lose so much of our story, of our history, of our potential. And so being able to share all of me, the good and bad, has been truly a gift as I've worked with other people. Let's see. One of the things that I have been grateful for as I've worked the 12 steps too is this idea that pain paves the road. Pain is the pathway to progress. Justin has this background behind him, and I would just mentioned I need to figure out how to get that background on my computer. And he said that he was an AI generated thing where he talked about, going up a path that's uphill, but leading to a better place than he's at. And that is it's the perfect background for this situation, for life, really. I remember the first time I was in a meeting and heard the Serenity Prayer. So I was a teenager in the 90s, and we used to have the Serenity Prayer like all over the place. There'd be like these little kitty posters at the store, and it'd be like the Serenity Prayer, and I didn't understand what it was. But as an adult in my situation, reading the Serenity Prayer, I remember being so annoyed at this idea that I could be reasonably happy in this life. And I just thought, is that what I'm here for? Is that what I have to look forward to? All of this work to be reasonably happy. And years down the road, I find myself answering people when they say, how are you doing? I will say, I'm reasonably happy. And I am happy there. I'm settled there. I'm good with that, because reasonably happy in a world full of messy people doing their best is okay for me now. I'm good. In our S&On book, in step 7, it talks about, we see that pain paves the road to many new realizations about ourselves, others, and God. And I often say that my painful mistakes are far better teachers than my wins. I remember the things that I miss on, right? Like if I make a choice and I don't like the outcome, I remember that pain better than I do the high of making the right choice that worked out for me. And so in that way, I've been really grateful, surprisingly, for the painful experiences that come along with addiction and with the associated betrayal trauma. I don't know, Justin, is there anything else that you?
No, if that's where you're at, we're good closing up the speaker portion and getting into the Q&A. If that's where you're at, is there anything else you'd like to share before we get to the Q&A, Kahi?
I can't think of anything else.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Kahi, for sharing your experience, strength, and hope. I wrote down several notes for questions, and we've got at least one question that's come in so far. A reminder to our live audience, if you have a question for Kahi, please type it in the chat. If you'd like to remain anonymous, either say anonymous, please, or direct message me rather than put it in the general chat, and we will get to those questions as we go along here. First question is from Vivian in our live audience. Vivian says, Kahi, what was your process to begin trusting your higher power again after your husband told you his secret?
That's a great question. One of the first things that I did, and the one that I think for me helped me the most, was I kept a journal of ways that I could see God's hand in my life every day for probably 2 or 3 years. And that was really hard for me in the beginning, because I really felt like he had just completely abandoned me years ago and didn't care. But I started to see little things here and there. And with the help of my sponsor, sometimes I would check in with her, and she'd say, what was the thing that you saw? How did you see God's hand in your life today? And I couldn't think of anything. And she would challenge me to really just sit. Sometimes it was, I woke up and my husband's addiction and the pain wasn't the first thing I thought about. Some days it was, I got a good parking spot. Some days it was, it was just like, it varied. But recognizing where I could see God's hand in my life, moving into some gratitude for where I was, despite the circumstances, really did get me to a point where I couldn't deny that God was in my life. It allowed me to even go back into years before discovering what was happening with my husband, and seeing the way that God had led me to the tools and resources that I needed to figure out where we were at, to find the tools to deal with the triggers, to, all of that. It helped me not feel like God had abandoned me, because I was able to see how he was showing up in my life currently and then in the past, which gave me the ability to have some hope that he would continue to show up for me in the future. So that's one of the biggest ways that I was able to get to a place where I could trust God. But really, I stayed on steps 1, 2, and 3 probably for 3 years. I just couldn't, partially because step 4 is kind of scary, but I would go and think, okay, I'm ready for step 4, and I would start working on it. And then something would happen and I'd be like, no, I'm back at step 1, 2, and 3. And I continue to work 1, 2, and 3. often. I feel like it's a daily thing, not like 10, 11, and 12.
Thank you, Kahi. And as you were sharing that gratitude was a remedy for that pain. You know, this last week, my wife and I went to an event where a speaker spent almost 2 hours speaking on resentment. And, you know, you think that's kind of crazy to have somebody speak for like 2 hours on resentment. But one of the things he said, you know what, gratitude is a remedy. He goes, and if you have to say, you know what, I'm grateful that I'm not on fire today, is what it is. And everybody
Yeah.
just kind of went, that's crazy. And he goes, you may think that's a crazy thing to say, but if you've ever been on fire before, you're going to be grateful that you're not on fire today. So even if it's something as silly and seemingly unlikely as that, there's something I can be grateful for and see that the hand of God in that.
Yeah.
All right. Next question that has come in is, as you and your husband continue to navigate the path of recovery, both individually and in your marriage, what are the things you are looking for and hoping for in your husband's recovery? In other words, the things you need to see and experience in order to feel safe in your choice to stay with him on this journey.
Oh, that's such a good question. I actually just shared with a sponsee a list of things that I believe come with solid recovery. The conversation my husband and I have been having lately is there's a difference between doing recovery and being in recovery. And what I'm looking for personally is some of the evidence of that recovery work seeping in and him changing from the inside, because I know what it feels like to change on the inside. I came to 12-step to fix my husband. I was sure that it would take me 12 weeks. I would do all 12 steps and my husband I would know exactly what I needed to say to him. And then he would be fine, because obviously he just didn't know what he needed to do in order to get better. And so I was pretty sure that that's what all I was going to need to do. I discovered that's not how that works. And, but there's a therapist. I know this is it okay for me to share? Even though it's not 12-step.
Yeah. You share your experience, strength, and hope. What's worked for you? Absolutely.
So there's a therapist who I have had interactions with in the past, and also follow her on Instagram. And her name is Jill Manning. She is great, has done a ton of research on betrayal trauma. And she just posted the other day a list of things that you can look for in your partner's journey to signify that they are in long-term recovery. The first one is accountability, a willingness to own harmful behaviors without excuses, minimizing and shifting blame. And I've heard enough addicts speak, and on this podcast, where it is amazing when they are able to say, yeah, I did that, and it's not okay, and I'm making amends. I'm working on it. And even for me, I have things that I have had to work on, and being accountable feels different. I don't always know. I mean, you can say the words without actually feeling it, but I know what it feels like when I hear someone be accountable. The second one is transparency. So honesty in actions and communication with no hidden agendas. The third one is consistent effort. The fourth is empathy. Fifth is humility. Sixth is healthy boundaries. And the seventh is self-compassion. My husband and I are currently in a situation where I have put in boundaries around this whole idea of long-term recovery. Like, are you really in recovery? Because it's easy to say I'm in recovery, but what I'm looking for are the fruits of that behavior. And so currently our situation is that he has committed to doing check-ins every night. My boundary is that I will not instigate those check-ins. If he wants to be connected and to be transparent and accountable, then he needs to instigate those. And that has been really helpful for me. It's been about, 4 months, and if he doesn't instigate them, I need to do surrender calls. I'm constantly like, not my job. It's not my job. This is not me. He needs to want this. He needs to work on this. So that is one thing that is helpful. I have committed as of the past 6 months or so that I will no longer be making up the gap in our connection. So if we're not feeling connected, I have spent years trying to chase and fill that gap. And I am no longer going to be doing that because I cross boundaries when I do that, because I try to control his behavior, and it's not helpful, and it doesn't produce anything that's good. It enables, and that's a really tricky thing to try to figure out the difference between enabling and helping. And so that's where I am right now, as far as like long-term recovery and choosing to stay in the marriage. It's a tricky thing. And I used to, when I first started coming to 12-step meetings, my biggest fear before that was that I would be married to a sex addict, like someone who looked at pornography. That was like my biggest fear. And there it was. And then my next biggest fear was that I would be a divorced mom of 4 or 5, now 5 kids. And I don't know where this is headed. And I have to be open to the idea that God can lead me in that area. I've had to surrender my marriage, what it looks like, and where it will end up 1,000 times. And I will continue to do that, knowing that no matter what happens, I will be okay because my higher power is with me and he can guide me, and I can find my validation, my self-worth in that relationship. It doesn't have to be, and really shouldn't ever be, settled in a relationship with another human being. That's kind of where I've landed.
Yeah. Thank you, Kahi. And you said something about, I was just trying to help when trying to fill that gap in the relationship. And recently I was talking to my sponsor, and I have adult children that I'm just trying to help, and he goes, Justin, help is just the sunny side of control. You're just trying to control. Let's be honest about it, And I was like, oh crap. Yes, you're right.
Yeah.
All right.
And I know what it feels like in my body when I'm in a centered place of help, and when I'm in a frantic control place, the sunny side of control. That's a good one. Yeah.
Love that. All right. This next question, I love the way it's worded. The question is, can you say more about your experience with the assets, the good, the positive? Because I cannot handle that. I heard you when you said it needs humility. How did you find that?
Yeah. So I don't remember. I cannot find the page where it talks about humility in my Esteban book. I was looking for it earlier. Essentially, humility is an ability to see yourself completely as you really are. And I had never heard of humility that way until I came to 12-step, but it really has been so helpful for me to couch it in that way. Humility is seeing things as they really are, the good and the bad. Until I was willing and able to see the good and the bad, I feel like it's just kind of this hiding game. I was constantly like, oh no, don't look at that part. Oh no, let's not talk about that. Oh, let's not, and now I feel like I'm pretty aware of my defects. I feel like I was aware of them already. One of the hard parts about the defects was parceling out the difference between what was a defect according to my higher power versus a defect according to my spouse. That was really hard for me, or my parents, or my siblings, or my neighbor, or my kids, or my, like really going to my higher power for that list was really important. Justin just talked about the sunny side of control is helping. And one thing that I came to recognize is, as I was doing my list of defects that I could come up with, my sponsor kept saying, you need to match those with assets. You need as long of a list of assets as you have of defects. This is not how this works. So my sponsor really pushed me to like, no, go back. No, go back. You have to keep looking. And one thing that I found was I could take almost every defect that I had and flip it. The opposite side of that coin was an asset that I had. And I felt like my assets turned into defects when I don't have God at my center. When my husband's at my center, or my kids are at my center, or my mom, my sisters, my, whatever. When I have somebody else other than God at my center, my asset of helping and serving turns into control super fast. And so I started kind of reverse engineering my assets according to my defects and thinking, oh, yeah, no, I do, I am a pretty, I don't know. I'm trying to think of a defect that I could like switch it. Control is my big one right now. So I do love to help. I do find so much joy in serving other people, in showing up for other people when they need something, and all of that. But anytime it just takes a little tiny twist, and I'm on the other side of the coin trying to control. And I know that I'm in control when it doesn't go the way that I think it should, and then I get upset. That's my red flag. Like, oh, it didn't work out the way I wanted, and now I'm mad because if they would just listen to me, everything would be fine. That's when I know that I've switched over into defect land. So I don't know. I get the struggle with assets, but that was where I started was, okay, let me see the defect, and then let me try to find the opposite of that. And generally, I found that to be true.
Yeah, I love that. One of my big defects is impatience, which stems from selfishness. But, I had somebody point out to me, they said, "Hey, Justin, I love that you're always on time. I love that you are always like first in line to get things done when it's asked of you to do that. But when you do that and you turn around and you expect everybody else to be right there in line with you at the same time you are and be early with you, that's when that desire to show up, that desire to be there turns into control and in impatience and selfishness." Yeah. And so that's something I've really had to work on in my own life to work to say, hey, I'm here because I want to be here. I want to serve. I want to be first. I want to do these things. And I not have the same expectation for everybody else. And that's been painful, but it's been good.
That often leads to resentment for me. Like, oh, now I'm just full of resentment because look at me. I'm over here and I'm serving and I'm helping. And I was my word, but you're not being your So it's like, and it switches so quickly. Those assets and defects are so tricky, but
absolutely.
It's a blessing to be aware.
Next question comes from Iris from India. Iris says, do you pray for your husband on a daily basis or pray with him together or do things together? Please give some examples.
That's another good question. We don't pray together because I feel like I switch into control pretty quickly. If we're praying together, I'm all up in his business. Like, what is he praying for? And why didn't he pray for this? And we need to pray for that. I get too codependent at that point. So we don't pray together. We do check-ins. We do talk about recovery. If he brings it up, currently, if he brings it up, then we talk about recovery. That's another thing that I have stepped back from recently is sharing with him all the things I'm learning in recovery, because I oftentimes think that we're on the same page about the work that is required for recovery, or that kind of thing. And so I don't bring it up, but I certainly am happy to talk about recovery with him if he brings it up. Check-ins have been the thing that we're on right now. In the beginning of our journey, Check-ins were really not helpful for me either, because I was, again, all up in his business, wondering, well, did you really call your sponsor today? Were you really not triggered by anything today? Were you all of these things? And I also recognized that check-ins were not helpful because he was not in a very good place. He needed to go to therapy. He needed to do some work. We needed to get to a place where gaslighting, manipulation, all of those behaviors that are common in addiction were lessened a little bit, so that I wasn't falling into the trap of being manipulated or gaslit while we were doing check-ins. So taking a step back from those for years was helpful for me. I feel like I'm in a better place now where I can do check-ins and hear and surrender and trust that this is a process, and he's learning what he needs to learn, and I'm learning what I need to learn, and God can guide us both along the way.
Yeah, this leads me to a question that just popped into my head. So let's talk about these process type addictions and afflictions that that people have that maybe their loved one may not be aware of. Gambling, sex addictions, stuff like that, where it's happening outside of the house, something to do with spending, maybe something like that. You talked about when your husband came to you and said, you know what, I got this problem with pornography, and he went to bed feeling like, all right, I dumped that. I feel great. I'm going to sleep well tonight. And it was a huge weight on your shoulders. Talk to me about what your thoughts are on disclosure, how to go about doing that, full disclosures, all these types of things. And how do you feel that's helpful or not helpful in these situations?
For me, my experience, I got to a point where I knew that in order for me to really have the opportunity to choose whether I was going to stay in the marriage or not, I needed to know where he had been, what he had been doing. And so I came to him while we were in therapy and said, I need a first step disclosure. I put a boundary around it. I told him to pick a date. I didn't care when that date was. I just needed a date and needed him to stick with it. And the boundary was that if he didn't have his first step, his full disclosure by that time, and share it with me, then he needed to sleep on the couch at that point. That was what I had come up with. And I really felt like the therapist was like, okay, tell me why you feel like you need this. And that was my answer. I need to know at this point what I'm dealing with, where he's been, what he's been doing, so that I can decide for myself whether I'm going to stay or I need to leave this marriage. So he did a first step disclosure at that point. I would not recommend the way that it went down for us. I would not recommend that to other people. Our therapist did not guide it as much as I think therapists are encouraged to do so now. She kind of worked with him on his for full disclosure. He read it to me at a park without a therapist there. I was in full shock, couldn't stand up, couldn't walk, didn't know where I was. I was a mess. It was very traumatizing for me. My husband and I grew up in the same town. We dated in high school. So we knew all the same people. So people that he had acted out with in the past, I knew everybody. And it was a full-blown, it was very traumatic. I would suggest that anybody who does a full disclosure or full disclosure do it with a therapist who understands addiction and betrayal trauma. There are a lot of CSAT, all kinds of letters you can have at the end of your name when you're a therapist. I would really suggest you meet with the therapist and ask them questions about their understanding of betrayal trauma. It can be very tricky to find a therapist who understands addiction, first of all, but then second of all, being married to an addict is a whole nother level. So I do believe that full disclosures are vital to recovery. I know when my husband did his full disclosure in the beginning, what changed for him was that it's kind of that concept of all of me, the good and bad. He said everything at that point that he could remember. in that full disclosure. And there was so much that I hadn't known about, but now I knew. And I know that was a pivotal point in his recovery, to feel like he wasn't hiding anymore. That's such a big part of addiction, is if anybody knew what I was doing, who I really was, nobody would want me, right? And a full disclosure can really help with that, with the help of a therapist, I think. But it's the same for me. If anybody knew my whole story, nobody would want me. Being able to step, as Brene Brown says, step into the arena unarmed and fully vulnerable is terrifying, but really such a gift, and the beginning of healing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kahi. And you mentioned stepping into the arena unarmed, exposing all good and bad. And you mentioned earlier that seeing the good and bad in yourself makes it easier to see and accept it in others. Talk to me about what superpower, I guess, I don't know if it's a superpower, but what strength that brings for you when you see somebody else really struggling and you can step back and say, you know what, that person's struggling and I can have compassion for them rather than judgment for them.
Oh, there's just so much. I feel like I'll use this example. It's kind of silly, but it's the one that came to mind. Years ago, I remember backing out of my driveway and this lady's coming down the road and she's just barreling down the road, didn't see me. I had my kids in the car. I remember just being so frustrated that someone wasn't like, watch where you're going. That's dangerous, like so frustrated that she wasn't watching where she was going. And a couple of years later, I was in the car trying to get my kids to school. I'm like telling one to put on their seatbelt. The other one's crying because the backpack fell off, just like, and I'm a mess and I'm backing out of the driveway and I do not see. Well, I know I was out of the driveway and driving down the road and another car was backing out of their driveway and I did not see them. And I passed by and they honked. And I thought, my immediate thought was, that's probably what she was going through at the moment when she didn't see me backing out of the driveway. That ability to recognize my own humanity, to be compassionate with myself, to say, yeah, I messed up on that, to know what it feels like to do a step 10, to apologize and to make amends, really has opened up my eyes to, I really truly believe that everyone is doing their best. And that's a hard place for me to come to sometimes when I'm feeling really victimized and really like, whatever. But recognizing that everyone here is trying their best and we all struggle and we can all take a deep breath and do our best has just opened up the door for me to let go of so many things that I can't control and to give people the benefit of the doubt while also learning how to hold boundaries has been key. That empathy, that ability to love others for who they are and where they are can only really truly be done when I have solid boundaries in place. Anyways, so the boundaries and the empathy have to go together for me. But I don't know, I just feel like I'm a much happier, more settled person when I can say, wow, they're struggling today. I will never judge the mom yelling at her kids in the grocery store again. I will not, because I don't know. Is she in trauma right now? Did her cat just die? Did her kid just die? We just have no idea what other people are going through. And 12 steps have really helped me get to a place where I can say, well, I'm sorry that it's hard today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Kahi. So as we start wrapping this up, do you have any final words of wisdom or thoughts that have come onto your heart that you're like, I need to share this before we wrap up?
Um, Not really. I just am so grateful for um the 12 steps, for people out there who are willing to work, to be vulnerable, to show up in the mess, to be available when other people are a mess. Um, I would say that if this feels off to you, like it's not working, I'm trying, but it's not working, to give it a little bit more time. That this is a process. Recovery is a process, and it's an ebb and flow. Some days I feel it, some days I feel stagnant, some days it's a process, but I'm grateful, so grateful to be here.
Thank you so much, Kahi. It was
Thank
a
you.
great Rico 12 weekly speaker meeting. If anybody else had a question or would like to get in contact with Kahi, please either join our WhatsApp community or send an email to me at rico12pod@gmail.com, and I can help facilitate getting in contact with her. And if you haven't already done so, please consider rating and reviewing the podcast on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. It's a powerful way to work step 12 and getting this message out to more people who are seeking a solution. Next Friday, we'll be hearing from another first-time speaker. Her name is Samantha, and we're looking forward to hearing from her. So stay tuned on the WhatsApp community or on our email list. If you're not on the email list, send me an email. Once again, rico12pod@gmail.com. We'll get you on the email list so that you have that link every week. Now, let's launch off into the rest of our day with the 11th and 11th step prayer that Kahi will stay for us.
Thank you. 11th step prayer. Higher power, as I understand you, I pray to keep my connection with you. Open and clear from the confusion of daily life. Through my prayers and meditation, I ask especially for freedom from self-will, rationalization, and wishful thinking. I pray for the guidance of correct thought and positive action. Your will, higher power, not mine, be done.
Thank you so much, Kahi. Remember, everybody, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find God now. Keep coming back, and when you do, come all the way in, sit all the way down. Let's trudge this road of happy destiny together. Work it. You are worth it.
Standing still a moment, carving out this time, reflecting on the landscape of this life of mine. Peaks too high to conquer, streams too wide to cross, troughs too deep to walk through without incurring loss. Yet here I am, still standing tall, despite the rough terrain. One like me survived the storms and walked through wind and rain. Still standing, I will fight the good fight, still searching for glimmers of light, feet still on the ground. I can still be found, standing still.
My wings are torn and tattered, but I know I still can fly. I may not soar unfettered, I may not rise too high.
Record it in the book of life and bind it with the seal that I am bowed and broken, I am standing still.
Only God knows where the path of life will yet lead
the night.